anyway, we're recording. Thank you for coming. I want to really thank our speakers, both of whom are exceptionally busy. Presenters, I'll say. So thank you, Matt and Shenna, for doing this. I know things are more hectic than they were when I talked to you, a little while ago about this. I also want to thank Kathleen McGee. When I reached out to Shenna to do this program quite a while ago, I didn't hear back. And turns out that she was away. And I said, who else would you recommend, Kathleen? And she said, well, Matt Dunlap. And so I reached out to Matt, and then Shenna came back, and I said, well, maybe both of you could do this. And so thanks again, Matt, for being gracious enough to let Shenna come in on what was going to be your evening. And Martin McDonough, our Maine web coordinator and Zoom coordinator. So let's see if this slide moves. And I'll get a click a button here. Friends of Merrymeeting Bay is one of the only groups around that really takes a holistic look at the environment, and we do this primarily through these four different areas: research, advocacy, conservation, education. And there are a few slides here of examples for some of the areas that we work in. Our advocacy is typically informed by our good and often cutting edge research. So we've used caged mussels to tell whether or not the pulp mills are still discharging dioxins when they change procedures, protocols. We've done a massive circulation study of the bay, which is kind of a soup bowl, and the data from that were useful in stopping a proposed 50 propeller, 50 foot propeller major hydroelectric generation plan for the chops, for the whole, where every migratory fish in the Kennebec and Androscoggin River passes through. Longest running bald eagle breeding surveys in the state, aerial surveys. And we just finished a summer of gathering water quality data on the what I call the upper lower Androscoggin River, trying to move a classification upgrade from Lisbon Falls up to Gulf Island Pond. The reason for the classification upgrade is that locks in the water quality, the improved water quality that we have now. And again, our advocacy around following up on some of the research, a lot of it's around fish migrations and turbine mortality issues at hydropower dams. A lot of it's been around PFAS in the last few years. Long history of working with kids. If we don't teach the kids about this stuff, who is there to, carry on and care for it? So we have in-school work, and we have these twice-a-year bay days where we just had 170 kids out on the shore of the bay doing hands-on really fun stuff away from their devices and getting dirty. It was great. We're always looking for volunteer presenters and chaperones. And we protected, well over 1,000 acres. This is an old slide of valuable wildlife habitat around the bay, and our focus is that rather than on people trails and stuff like that. So, as I say, we're recording the program. If you miss it, your friends miss it, they can watch it here. You can come back to it. Kind of come down the home page, on the right side, different sections for the different areas of focus. Under education, you'll see speaker series video recordings here, and a number of other speaker related stuff, and you can click on that. You'll get an event page like maybe you saw describing this event, and at the bottom will be a YouTube of the recording. And here's our series for the season. Our next one I'll mention, Brian Check, the Center for Advancement of the Steady State Economy. He will be speaking about steady state economy and environmental protection. And Brian served as the first conservation biologist in the history of U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, actually from 1999 to 2017. And Cassie's mission was to advance the steady state economy with stabilized population and consumption as a policy goal and widespread support for that. All right. Our speakers tonight, Matt Dunlap, hopefully many of you recognize both of them. Matt is Old Town's, Matt's from Old Town, is Maine's 23rd state auditor. Prior to that, he served 7 terms as the 47th and 49th Secretary of State and was in the Maine House of Representatives for 4 terms, representing Old Town in the Indian Island voting district. He chaired the joint committees on inland fisheries and wildlife and government oversight, and was a member of the House Standing Committee on Elections. Dunlap's work resulted in the development of the Lifetime Hunting and Fishing License Endowment, establishment of OPEGA, the Office of Program Evaluation and Government Accountability, and the development of Central Voter Registration System and ranked choice voting, among many other things. Matt was a member of President Trump's Advisory Commission on Election Integrity in 2017, which Trump dissolved after Matt successfully litigated that the commission was not acting transparently or in good faith. Surprise, surprise. Former member of SAM, Sportsmen's Alliance of Maine, Matt served as executive director in between Secretary of State terms. And he is an award-winning columnist for the Northwood Sporting Journal. He has served as a member of the Maine State Wabanaki Child Welfare Truth and Reconciliation Commission and many other boards and commissions, and holds a bachelor's degree in history and a master's in literature from the University of Maine. He's also known as a vampire killer and werewolf hunter. His words. Shenna is Maine's 50th and first female Secretary of State. She led implementation of reforms like automatic voter registration and online voter registration in Maine, and has taken strong stance against Donald Trump, like when she ruled he wasn't eligible for the 2024 ballot because of his incitement of the insurrection on January 6th. Bellows is used to speaking truth to power and was executive director of the ACLU of Maine before she entered elected office. She understands the dangers that this moment in our experimental democracy brings us to, having led Maine's Holocaust and Human Rights Center for several years. And Shenna was one of the leaders of Maine's marriage equality campaign. She and her husband waited to marry until their gay and lesbian friends and family could. She helped win that campaign by launching Republicans for the Freedom to Marry out of the ACLU, even though she's a Democrat. And that kind of bipartisan coalition building helped her turn a red district blue when she was elected to a state Senate district that voted for her and Donald Trump in 2016. And she graduated magna cum laude from Millbury, the BA in International Politics and Economics, and wrote her thesis on economic and environmental sustainability. So our next speaker is going to be kind of right up your line, right up your alley, Shenna. And Shenna said we could call her the Dragon Slayer. I'll say the evil Dragon Slayer. She's been that all of her life. So it's an honor and privilege to welcome both you, Shenna, and Matt to the program tonight. We really appreciate you being here. I thought, given Matt's sort of longer tenure on this issue, I think, and his work on it, voter ID and real ID a long time ago, and his academic background in history. Matt, if you could maybe start with the history of where we're at and how we got here, and then Shenna can probably pick up and go on to where we're at now and the trials and turmoil she's undergoing with the current administration and the current Yes on One campaign. Matt.
Sure thing. Well, thank you so much, Ed, for inviting us. This is an important issue right now with this upcoming referendum election, which Shenna is managing quite nicely. I'm very proud of her work. And she works for everyone, and that's why we have a successful democracy. So the issue around voter ID, and this is something that's been talked about for a long time, and the reason why we had that little subtitle was when I was on that Presidential Advisory Commission. It was one of those things when you talk about voter fraud to the people that were promoting these ideas. I came to liken it to this sort of scenario that we used to have when I was growing up in Bar Harbor. I lived on a farm, and around Halloween, we'd get these admonitions from the teachers. Do not take apples when you're trick-or-treating. And why not? Well, because razor blades, sewing needles. And this has become part of the urban mythology of our society. Now, I have in my life, and I'm 60 years old now, I have never read a news story in early November about a hapless child who had been severely mauled by biting into an apple. And if you get a kid that age to bite into an apple, you're way ahead of the game. Having their gums torn to pieces by these, razor blades that had been evilly put into the apples. But, the mythology lives on. So that's why I kind of said, we talked about the voter fraud vampire hunters, because it's everywhere. And, during that time, one of the other commissioners, a fellow named Hans von Spakovsky, who worked at the Heritage Foundation, had this book about this thick that he chopped around. I have a copy, documenting thousands of prosecuted instances of voter misconduct. Well, part of what he never gave as a qualifier for that the most recent prosecution was sometime in like 1975, and most of them went back to the 1940s. And legislatures have been very nimble at making adjustments to election law where needed. There's a reason why we have pre-printed ballots, for example. There's a reason why we have sealed ballot boxes, because of things that went wrong in the past. I won't get into the great detail of those. I want to leave as much time for you as I possibly can.
Hey, Matt, can I just interrupt 1 second? Are you sharing your screen or not? I don't think you are. And if
I don't have anything to share. I'm just talking.
Yeah, well, okay. I don't know if people want to see a bigger picture of you or not, because I think that's what would happen if you did. Oh, I'm sorry. Maybe you are anyway. I don't see.
Well, I guess people can look at the view.
Whatever. So, all right, well, keep going. Sorry about that.
I'm not fluent in Zoom, so it was a pandemic thing that we took on by necessity. But anyway, I don't want to get into the weeds too much about this, but we started putting photographs on driver's licenses, and we've only been issuing driver's licenses really since 1937. We didn't require a driver's license until then. In fact, most states did not, although some of the other New England states were requiring them as early as before World War I. But it's always just a piece of paper with your name on it that said you were qualified to operate a vehicle. We began putting photographs on driver's licenses in the late 70s to keep teenagers from using a friend's license or older sibling's license to buy alcohol. And we weren't trying to create an identity document, but that's how it's been used. And so this is the argument about voter ID. Well, you have to present an ID, to buy alcohol. You have to present an ID to board a plane. You have to present an ID to rent a car or whatever. Why don't you have to present an ID in order to vote? So I'm going to end my piece with this little vignette from when we were dealing with the Real ID Act situation. And with, the headline that came out of West Virginia, that a World War II veteran who had lost a leg in the Battle of the Bulge could not renew his driver's license because he couldn't prove he was an American citizen. He was born in a cabin in the hills, and he didn't have a birth certificate. Proof of citizenship is a very narrow band of documents that we would require for that sort of thing, and they were requiring proof of citizenship in order to get a driver's license. Not every state does that. So I don't think any state does it now because it was so difficult. So the idea of requiring voter ID isn't the problem. The problem are the requirements that a state or the federal government could impose in being able to obtain that credential. And the point really is of the vampire hunters is that who can't get driver's licenses? Well, people who don't drive, obviously, people who may be in nursing homes and haven't driven for years and don't have ready access to a motor vehicle office to get an ID card. And the net effect is those people who, if you require an ID to vote, well, they don't vote. And the theory is, who do they vote for? Well, they tend to vote for Democrats. One would, my experience is that people vote how they feel. And I know plenty of older people who vote Republican. I know many a college student who votes Republican, but there's that mythology that those demographics of young people, older people tend to vote Democratic. And it's a sort of a seamy underbelly, if you will, of electioneering. We talk about getting out the vote. We're really talking about getting out your vote. We're not talking about getting out the other guy's vote. And that's where a lot of this sort of thing comes from. I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to probably turn it over to Secretary Bellows, and she can talk about the current situation.
Thank you, Matt.
Could you stop sharing your screen?
What, I can stop sharing. Yep.
Yeah. Good. Now we can see Matt and Shenna.
I see a ton of people. That's all. So.
If you go to your upper right and hit speaker in your view, that will help you to see the speaker.
Okay. Saw that earlier, but I can't find it now. But anyway, okay.
No worries. That was excellent, Matt. And I always love hearing you speak. And actually, I first met Matt back in 2005. I was a 29-year-old executive director of the ACLU of Maine, coming home to me.
Share your screen, Shenna.
I'm sharing my screen.
Share your screen.
Martin, it's hard to speak up closer to your mic there. It's hard to understand what you're saying.
Shenna, share your screen.
And it is sharing. Okay.
Okay. I don't have any slides. I'm just speaking extemporaneously.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No worries. I do think I'm going to just, if we could mute everybody except for me, that would be helpful. I think there's a reverb.
There is.
Yeah. Okay. I was going to say, I first met Matt in 2005 when I was a 29-year-old new executive director of the ACLU. It's actually when I first met Kathleen McGee, who is one of the state's most brilliant field organizers. And that's when they first passed the Real ID Act. And we ended up, at the ACLU, we honored Matt with an award for his advocacy for privacy and security. Now, I joke now that my sins of opposing Real ID have come home to haunt me because I run the Bureau of Motor Vehicles as the 50th Secretary of State, like Matt did. But finally, 20 years later, the feds finally got serious. And this year, the Trump administration, who previously said that they supported privacy, said that Mainers wouldn't be able to fly unless people had the Real ID. And that this time they meant it. And I share that because Matt said something really profound. He talked about that individual trying to prove that he's a citizen. And I ended up hiring an immigration attorney to help the customer service representatives at the BMV. And I thought that that would be for our complicated new Mainers. But fun fact, our new Mainers, especially our new citizens, they have their papers. It's turned out that the people having the hardest time getting the Real ID are senior citizens in our state, because under the federal law, you have to prove that you're a citizen. And if you've lived your whole life, maybe fought in a war, served your country, voted, but without thinking about being a citizen, without thinking about your proof, that can be really challenging, especially if you're from the county or from Washington County. And when you were born, maybe you were born in Canada. So when we ask you for your birth certificate, it's Canadian. So suddenly my immigration attorney is asking people about their parents' status, where their parents were born, where their grandparents were born. It gets really complicated. The other people that can't get a Real ID, married women. 85% of married women change their names when they marry. Now, they can, but what they have to show us is both their birth certificate and their marriage certificate. And God forbid they got a divorce and decided to lose that first marriage certificate when they changed their name, because then we need more proof of how their name has changed. I talked to a very conservative Republican today who wanted to know how he and his wife could get their Real ID. They were born in Alaska. He said they reached out to Alaska. They can't figure, it's going to take them months, maybe 8 months to get their birth certificates. And he was really frustrated. And I was like, this is the federal law. And what I will say is that should we implement these requirements at the time of voter registration, the long lines that we see at the BMV right now, because we have double the customers, we may see those on election day, just like so many other states, like Georgia sees when they have these strict ID requirements. So that's why we're so fired up. Now, I do want to share one more thing. Mainers should feel so proud. This was true when Matt was secretary. It's true now. We rank at the top of the nation in voter turnout. In 2022, we were #1 in the nation in voters who participated in the election. In 2024, more Maine citizens voted than ever before in our history. We were only third. Minnesota kind of cheated by putting Tim Walz on the ballot. Wisconsin was #2, but we were #3 in the nation in 2024. Now, that I think is a testament to the confidence that Mainers have in our elections. And I will say, I just want to add, our elections, Maine election laws, construed over decades carefully with bipartisan support, are on the ballot this November. If you know nothing else about question 1, just read the question when you go to vote on election day, and you will understand what is on the ballot. And I'll share this. Do you want to change Maine election laws to eliminate 2 days of absentee voting, prohibit requests for absentee ballots by phone or family members, end ongoing absentee voter status for seniors and people with disabilities, ban prepaid postage on absentee ballot return envelopes, limit the number of drop boxes, require voters to show certain photo ID before voting, and make other changes to our elections? And oh, by the way, those certain types of photo ID don't include student IDs or tribal IDs. Wonder why. So I'm going to stop there because, again, like Matt said, we want to hear your questions. We're happy to answer them. What we want to spread good information about our elections to strike down those vampires, werewolves, and dragons.
Well, thank you so much, Shenna. That's a great summary there. I have a I really want to thank you for standing up to the Department of Justice lately. That's great. I know there's some other states doing it too. I think you were probably the first. We're darn close. So
can I interject? Matt was the first.
well, in the most recent.
So let me share fun. I just want to tell a little story, and then Matt can put some color on.
Which DOJ volume are we talking about? Volume 1 or volume 2?
Exactly. So, well, and to be fair, it wasn't DOJ in 2017, but the Trump administration tried to get all of the voter data of all American citizens in the nation. And that's what Matt was doing so powerfully when he stood up on the Kobach Commission. And not a single secretary, oh, Ed, there's some reverb with you if you want to mute yourself. Not a single secretary caved in that moment. And Delbert Housman, the Mississippi Republican Secretary of State, told Trump back then in 2017, go jump in the Gulf of Mexico. Well, fast forward to 2025, and now it's the Department of Justice. And they're asking for voter data, and they're sending these letters to all of the states. And states are, we're in a time where some people, large institutions, are caving, right? We are seeing people who should be standing up for the Constitution and the rule of law, and they are capitulating. And so we're having these conversations. And my perspective was, of course, we should not be sharing your personal sense of voter information with the federal government. Under Article 1 of the Constitution, it's the states, not the federal government, that are in charge of elections. And what does DOJ want with it anyway? Now, federal government has a terrible track record with keeping your private data safe, but never mind that. What in an era where DOJ is targeting their political enemies, do they really need to know who's a Democrat, who's a Green Party member, who's a third party member of other sorts, or really? Is that what we want? And so I use those words, jump in the Gulf of Maine, because I wanted to send a message to my fellow secretaries to remember the history and to say no. Now, unfortunately, by coming out so strongly and leading the charge nationally, that led the Department of Justice to sue Maine first, along with Oregon. But we're not backing down because this is a matter of defending our Constitution. So I'm glad you asked about that, Ed. I think it's really important. It's another dragon and werewolf or vampire, but this time it's real. DOJ wants their data. Matt, I don't know if you have additional color to put on it from back in the day, because you were fighting this battle in the first Trump administration.
Well, I don't want to get into a long shaggy dog story, but there was one reporter who was working for ProPublica at the time. Her name was Jessica Huseman. And she was one of those types of journalists that simply read everything. She would, those of you who know Kathleen McGee would be reminded of Jessica Huseman by Kathleen McGee. But she was the one that kind of like got my attention around this whole issue around previous litigation and whatnot. But she was the one that discovered we had our first teleconference by phone before we were sworn in, and we were enjoined that we cannot talk about any actual business because this is not a public meeting and the federal law prevents that. But we could start talking about some of the things that we wanted to maybe work on. And Secretary Kobach from Kansas said, well, maybe we could get copies of all the voter files. And I said, we should really hold off a minute on that because, you know, most elections officials are jealous guardians of that information. And like in Maine law, we require it to be paid for. You have to pay $10,000. I think it's still $10,000. And only certain entities can access it, like political parties, issue campaigns, candidates, and research institutions at the discretion of the Secretary of State. So we get the letter. And when I say what she uncovered was that they had already written the letter months before we had our first meeting. Because the letter came out within hours. I thought, wow, that was quick. You know, well, federal government, right? But no, they already had the letter in the hopper. So that was part of what informed the success of the litigation when Vice President Pence said when he swore us in that there was going to be no preordained conclusions or preconceived notions, which is absolute crap. They already had when we finally won the litigation, they had to turn over those documents to us. They had a frame of mastheads that said demonstrated cases of voter fraud with lots and lots of blank pages. So they knew what they wanted to do. And the only thing we really accomplished there was to force it into the public square. You know, they couldn't do it through a side door with a rule change at the Homeland Security Department or something like that. But, you know, they had very much in mind what they wanted to do. So the thing that triggered my response, which was a bit measured, they said that as we turned over the voter files, we had to understand that these will all be made public. Well, Maine law says that anyone who accesses the voter file has to keep it confidential. So I referred the statute to them in my letter, and I said that the posture of the statute regarding accessing for research is discretionary, but the statute around confidentiality is directory, and on that basis, your request is denied. So, and I was on the commission, but they, you know, the question of what they wanted to do at that time, their goal was to look at people who are registered in more than one state for potential double voting. And then not long after that, it was revealed that many members of the Trump administration were actually registered in more than one state because they had registered to vote in Arizona, and then they moved to Washington and they register in Virginia without canceling their prior registration. You can be registered in as many states as you want. It's what the clerk is supposed to do when you move to East Wagon Wheel, Maine, and you say, have you been previously registered? And I go, oh, yes, I was registered in West Overshoe, Montana. And they're supposed to say to the West Overshoe clerk that person no longer lives there. You need to cancel the voter registration. That happens. It does not happen in real time. It takes a while. And that's probably one of the shortcomings of the Help America Vote Act. So, you know, what they wanted to do with it was try to find ways to pin the charge of voter fraud on people. And even, and again, I'm talking too much, but even up to the point where we had our first meeting in New Hampshire, when Secretary Kobach had written an op-ed piece in Breitbart magazine, which is a conservative online publication, he said he'd found all the evidence of voter fraud that he needed right in New Hampshire. And here you have over 5,000 college students in New Hampshire who registered to vote on election day. And here we are, it's September. Only a small handful have ever converted their driver's licenses to New Hampshire driver's licenses. And he brought it up again in the meeting, and it kind of fell out of my mouth. I said, well, making an equation that not updating a driver's license is evidence of voter fraud is very much like saying that if you have cash in your wallet, it's proof that you must have robbed a bank. So that was when they dropped the wall down, cut me off. And then Jessica said, well, this has happened before. I had some outreach from a watchdog group it was kind of like something out of a spy movie. I got a call from a chief of staff from a senator who said, I have a message for you from another chief of staff, doesn't want to be named. But I have a question for you, Matt. And I said, what's that? He said, do you have a lawyer? And I said, do I have a lawyer? And he said, oh, yeah, you're going to need lawyers. You can't take on the Trump White House and the Department of Justice by yourself. You're going to need legal help. And those were the people that took this on and wrote the litigation, and it was successful. The judge made her decision granting the preliminary injunction on December 22nd. It was our anniversary. Thank God, we were waiting for the check in the restaurant, and that's when everything just blew up. And then within 10 days, Trump had dissolved the commission. So it was an intellectually dishonest effort from the very start, because the entire point, and I think Secretary Bellows would agree with me in her assessment of this proposed initiative, was to make it more difficult for people to access their own democracy. And they calculate that their people will be able to surmount those challenges because they are very committed, and that people who are on the more progressive end of the spectrum will just throw their hands up and walk away, giving them an advantage in the election.
There's a question in the chat, and I think this goes to Matt's point. He's so right that the motives are they're politicians who want to choose their voters instead of having the voters choose the politicians. That's what it comes down to. But there's a question in the chat about cases of voter fraud, and I wanted to pull it up, and
we had one.
Two. Remember that the two people that voted twice in 2020.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's fraud. It wasn't impersonation. It was one person literally voted twice, and one person intercepted a roommate's ballot. Right.
That was the fraud case. So you're right, Shenna. And we would get a couple of hundred. I'm sure you do too. Every election cycle of suspected cases of double voting, where someone has requested an absentee ballot, but they lose it in the pile of seed catalogs at the end of the couch, and they forget they've requested it. So then they show up at the polls and they check in, they get a ballot, they vote. Well, now they've had two ballots assigned to them. If the absentee ballot was never turned in, that's fine. The case that Shenna just described, we had a group of young women living together at the University of Maine, 3 very conservatives, 1 very progressive, didn't work very well. The progressive student moves out, gets a new apartment, but she was a member of the University Democratic Committee, and she knew the drill. So she goes to the town hall to update her stuff so she could get another absentee ballot. She already ordered one, but it hadn't shown up yet. And the clerk said, well, you've already turned in your ballot. I have it right here. So one of the roommates thought it'd be kind of funny to mark the ballot for Donald Trump and then sign her roommate's name to it. And apparently discovered it wasn't so funny when a detective from the Attorney General's office showed up and charged her with 2 Class C felonies for marking another person's ballot and then signing their name to an election instrument. So they worked that out, but that was the only true. And the other cases, people just make mistakes. They don't know what they're doing. People move from one town to the next. They vote before they leave. They register to vote in the other town. They hand them all this stuff. Well, there's different names. And so they don't think they're doing anything wrong. Before Shenna's time, we had a case where a woman had 2 sons who went on a skiing trip in Colorado, and their absentee ballots showed up, and it was right before the election. So she called them on the phone and said, how do you want to mark your ballot? And she marked their ballots for them and turned them in, never realizing that it's a felony to mark somebody else's ballot. And so there was an educational component to that, but she wasn't trying to do anything wrong. And I think what people understand about elections is they go to the polling place, they declare themselves, they get their ballot, they mark their ballot, they cast their ballot. They don't see any of the mechanisms behind the scenes to make sure that that process is secure. And I think, when you talk, another question in the chat is about, do any of these things strike a balance between protecting voting security and not inhibiting voter participation? Great question. That's a very delicate balance. And I have had arguments with radio show hosts about, college student voting. It's like they don't know the local issues. They move here for 6 months and they're voting in our elections. It doesn't seem right. But the thing is, they're American citizens who have an affirmative right to vote. They have an affirmative right to declare a home. And and I've had this conversation with members of the press. It's like, look, you write for the Press Herald. You've been doing it for 30 years. What if the editor of the Chicago Tribune called you tomorrow and said they want you to be their editorial page editor? What are you doing? You're going to Chicago, right? But for the time being, for as long as you can predict, you are going to be here. That is your single continuous residence. It's where you plan on returning to even when temporarily absent from. So that can be a dormitory. I mean, I moved to Old Town 1989, never intending to stay there for one academic semester as a graduate student, but moving apartments in January really stinks. So I decided to stick around. But I had registered to vote because my parents raised me right, participate. I've been in Old Town for 36 years. Never planned on being here. So should I have not registered to vote? I mean, I would not be here today if I had not voted. So in terms of the security, the systems we have in place, the chain of custody, where you can describe with great certainty what happens to a ballot from the time it leaves a printing press to when it's marked and sealed in a ballot box at the end of the election, and who has touched it at any moment along the way, and all the safeguards that protect voter privacy, their right to vote. I think we have a very good balance.
Couldn't agree more. And if you are curious, there was a voter fraud commission established in 2013, a 5-member commission appointed by former Secretary Charlie Summers. They were majority conservatives, and they held hearings across the state. They scoured the state for historical references of voter fraud. And guess what they found? Nothing. In fact, it was a fantastic report because they endorsed everything that we're doing now. And I think that's really important. The strength of our election laws isn't just because, Matt and I are both great secretaries, but it's not us. It's our laws, same-day voter registration, that was established in 1973 by a Republican legislature. Absentee voting, well before our time. So these are things that have been in place for decades that are why Maine does so well nationally and what folks are trying to change now. So the question is there a possible enhancement in the system to protect voter security? I love this question because I just got done chairing a national election security and cybersecurity organization. It's a bipartisan organization, Republican secretaries, county officials, all sorts of partners in law enforcement, in cybersecurity and elections across the country. I chaired that in 2024. I'm still on the board. The number one thing that we can do is invest in cybersecurity at our municipalities in a variety of different ways, and invest and spend money on improved technologies over time. And you know what the Trump administration did on Valentine's Day? And the reason I remember is my husband was making me dinner and I got a text. They zeroed out all funding for that National Election Security and Cybersecurity Group. Zeroed it out. It's all gone. On September 30th, we got confirmation it wasn't coming back. And so in terms of enhancements in our current system to protect voting security, enhancements include endpoint detection response, malicious domain blocking and reporting, stronger networks, stronger systems, and that requires resources, and it's resources the federal government has eliminated. So, today I was at the Maine Municipal Association conference. It's always a fun time. I was talking about election laws, and 2 doors down was a very important session being hosted by University of Maine and Augusta, cybersecurity session for municipalities. And they were talking, they were doing tabletops, they were planning, they were prepping, and they were talking about how to strengthen cybersecurity. That's what we should be doing.
I think probably every cop on every cop show in history has said at one point or another, coincidence, there's no such thing as coincidence. And regarding what happened recently with the ballots, regardless of what your take on that is, clearly something happened there for ballots to show up, assuming they were real ballots, which I believe they were. And I believe you said on the air the other day that they probably belonged in Ellsworth or someplace, right? Can you elaborate at all, not on what you're doing necessarily, but more on the, you know, how could something like that happen in general? I assume that as Matt was elaborating earlier, you go through a lot of in-house security stuff to just prevent this sort of thing.
Yep.
No accounting for humans, and that's probably, you get a bad apple and something happens. But can you detail? Yeah.
So the procedures we follow, the chain of custody from printing of the ballots right through to counting the ballots on election day, it is very tight. And I want to share what that is because it's not new. It's the same chain of custody that Secretary Dunlap followed, that Secretary Summers, Republican, followed. It's well established. Ballots are printed at an Augusta-based printer according to specifications. So the Secretary of State's office designs the ballot, but it is printed through a contract printer, a reliable local Maine printer. They package the ballots with security measures and security tape at the printer and ship directly through UPS and US Postal Service. Those boxes of ballots each have individual tracking numbers so that they are being tracked through the shipping facilities. And when they are received by a clerk or municipal official, they have to be signed for. And then that clerk has to complete a ballot receipt that they received the ballots. They received the correct number of ballots. And I thought you might ask me about this. So for folks who are new to the story, I do want to share what the facts are that I can share now. And I will say this is under law enforcement investigation. And in my top line message with this is threefold. Voters should have confidence the system worked, right? Obviously, whatever bad actor involved didn't understand how our elections work, because whether a ballot is fabricated or stolen, it can't be voted without it corresponding to a lawful voter request, whether that's an absentee ballot request or on election day. And there's so many checks and balances. So for voters, you should know the election started, absentee voting started on Monday, uninterrupted. Every single town has their absentee ballots, and absentee ballot voting is happening right now successfully. And to the bad actor who's responsible for this, you will be caught and you will be punished. And I think what's really concerning about this, well, let me just share the facts before I go into a little bit more editorializing. And I'd love to hear Secretary Dunlap's perspective, or Auditor Dunlap's perspective, former secretary. But the facts are this. On Tuesday, the Ellsworth City Hall received 2 boxes of absentee ballots as planned. One of those boxes was not the standard box that was shipped from the printer, and 5 packets of ballots totaling 250 ballots were missing. The Ellsworth clerk's office did exactly what we always instruct the clerks to do. They notified the elections division in my office of the missing ballots that initiated the protocols that the elections division always does to open an investigation, starting with reaching out to the printer and the authorized carrier to investigate what happened. Also on Tuesday, an unnamed woman in Newburgh, Maine, allegedly received 5 packets totaling 250 Maine absentee ballots in an Amazon box along with her Amazon order. At some point on Tuesday, the unnamed woman's legislator and the Maine Wire were contacted and notified of the events. At no point on Tuesday did anyone involved contact the Secretary of State's Elections Division or law enforcement. On the next day at 8 a.m. when the office opened, the Newburgh town office contacted us to say that they had received ballots from this unnamed woman. And the Secretary of State has a law enforcement division. My detectives went out to secure those ballots and initiated an investigation, an official law enforcement investigation at my direction. Now they're collaborating closely with the Maine Office of the Attorney General, with Maine State Police, with the FBI and the US Postal Service inspectors. And that investigation's ongoing. So I can't speak to those details, but again, let me just reiterate, whatever happened, I have confidence law enforcement is going to figure that out. They are going to pull every thread and leave no stone unturned. And we will not stop until we have answers. And whoever is responsible for what happened will be punished. But most importantly, it didn't work. The system worked. The checks and balances worked. So the absentee balloting started as it should lawfully on Monday. That was a lot. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, and I'd like to emphasize what the Secretary Bellows has just said. You know, first of all, I have made an object study out of staying out from Secretary Bellows's feet. And when the press would call me about this and say, "Can you comment?" I'd say, "You know something? Bill Diamond, Dan Gwiadoski, Charlie Summers stayed out of my kitchen." You know, and as a courtesy to Secretary Bellows, she is the Secretary of State, and you really need to talk to her about that. But one of the questions I got was, "Well, couldn't someone mark these ballots and put them in a drop box?" Like, well, that's a little more complicated than that, because you have to have an absentee ballot application. You have to have an envelope that is signed by the voter. Those are all kept together. When you process absentees, you announce the ballot as if it's the voter in the room. And then you have the application held in alphabetical order. You open the envelope. The envelope is stapled to the application and kept on file. The ballots are shuffled together and then cast to preserve the secret ballot. But this is the question that comes up: just how tight is the security of this process? So let me tell you a little story about what I endured. So we had a recount of a Senate District 25, which included Greater Portland, Falmouth, and most critically, the town of Long Island. And on election night, the Democrat, Kathy Breen, is leading by 7 votes out of 25,000 ballots cast. Now, of course, the Republican, whose name was also Kathy, I don't remember her last name off the top of my head, but she requested a recount. Now, recounts go pretty quick, and the way a recount is set up, we don't do the counting. We, meaning Secretary of State's office, not the auditor's office. Try to remember which job I have. So it's actually the campaigns that do the counting. So you have a counter for the Republican sitting next to a counter for the Democrat, supervised across the table by a member of the Secretary's staff. So when you go through the whole public process of unsealing and opening ballot box, then the work begins of sorting ballots into lots of 50. So a team gets a lot of 50. They look for the ballots in favor of the Republican, ballots in favor of the Democrat. They count their totals. They trade piles. They count each other's piles. So I get there, because I live in Old Town, so I got there at 9:05, 5 minutes into the recount, and they'd already gone through the town of Long Island. And Julie Flynn, the deputy secretary for corporation elections and commissions, pulled me aside and said, "We got a problem in Long Island." I said, "What happened with Long Island?" She said, "They forgot to count 21 ballots. The number's 21 ballots off, because now the Republican is leading by 14 votes. Well, I hope no other town had that problem. Well, anyway, that held up through the entire recount. And at the end of the recount, the Republican is leading by 14 votes. So, you have to sign off on this. And Kathy Breen, the Democrat, opted to not sign off. So it's now going to go to the Committee on Senatorial Vote. The bodies themselves are the final arbiters of the qualifications of their members. It doesn't go to court. So a couple of weeks have to go by, and I'm grocery shopping on a Friday night, and I get a call from one of the attorneys for Kathy Breen, who says, "I think Kathy is ready to sign off on this, but she wants to find some peace. Could we go to the recount center on Monday and just look at the incoming voter list?" Now, the incoming voter list, when you go and announce yourself, they check your name off. Well, after the election, every check mark has to correspond to a cast ballot. Okay, that's what the basic building block of the integrity of making sure that every ballot has been counted and that only ballots that have been marked by voters are counted. Okay, so I don't go over there. I have another meeting. The chief deputy went along with the elections deputy. and the lawyers, they go to the state police headquarters, and I get this panic call. She said, we got a problem. And I said, well, what's the problem? And the problem is there are 21 more ballots than there are check marks. And I said, what everyone needs to do right now is calm down. We have no idea what's going on here. So as Shenna is enduring right now, and I think we should thank her for having such poise, right? Because this is scary. Publicly we're saying, well, we are investigating this, but privately, like, what the hell happened? And, we were like, okay. And Julie said, the only thing I can think of is that an elections clerk, thinking they were helping the Republican, marked 21 ballots and then got cold feet and just stuffed them in the ballot box rather than running them through the tabulator because they hadn't been counted. So let me tell you what happened. And we discovered this at the senatorial vote committee meeting. And one of the senators said to Julie Flynn, Julie, are you sure about this? Are you sure there's 21 more ballots? She gave herself that much wiggle room. She said, I am 99.99% sure. And if I'm wrong, I will eat my hat. So I'm listening on the intercom, and they're going through these ballots. And then all of a sudden, I hear Julie. She's like, oh my God, this is what happened. So remember the counting teams? So we had a counting team, Republican, Democrat. They have 29 votes for the Democrat, 21 votes for the Republican. They take away the 29 votes and they put the new lot on top of the 21 votes for the Republican, and they counted them twice. There was no fraud. It was a simple counting mistake that neither the Republican nor the Democrat nor the supervisor caught. Things were moving so fast, they just didn't catch it. So we would like to have caught it at the recount, but to Shenna's point, the process worked. We were able to account for every ballot and every voter action. And in the meantime, the rumors that were coming out about that, I got calls like, oh, we hear that the ballots were a different color paper, that only one race was marked. And most ominously, someone died on Long Island. Perhaps police should look into that. Maybe that has a connection to this whole thing. So where there's a lack of information, rumor rushes in to fill the void. We knew the process was tight, so tight that it would have taken the level of collusion that you would need to do what we suspected could have happened is almost biblical in scope. You'd have to have the cooperation of so many people convinced that they were doing the right thing to steal an election from someone. You only need one person to say, no, no, no. When I first came into office, we had a circumstances in the newspaper. This was great. There's a law office that was shutting down in Tennessee. They're closing up shop. They had a storeroom in the basement. They're cleaning all the stuff that had been there for decades. Well, they find a wooden state of Maine ballot box that was padlocked, covered with dust, and they sent it to us. And we took it in. It was from a town in Washington County. It was a municipal election sometime in the 1930s. We actually found the election results. We went through the process of opening the lock. We had to actually cut the lock off because the keys were long gone. And there were a bunch of ballots in it. Well, guess what? It didn't affect the outcome of the election. Somebody ran out the back door with a box of ballots thinking they were helping one of the candidates. Made no difference. So once again, the voters have the final say. And again, you amend your laws to prevent those types of things from happening. And that's why I have great confidence in the law and the team that Secretary Bellows has to secure the future of our elections and our ability to participate in our own democracy.
Mike has asked again, is there no possible enhancement that would further protect voting security? I think, Shenna, you answered that about the digital cybersecurity.
Yeah, that's right. I think I was answering that question, and I see two more questions, and I know we're 3 minutes away. I was about to say, applaud.
We can be flexible.
Okay. So college students, yes, they would be impacted because right now to register to vote, you need proof of identity and proof of residency. Now that proof of identity is pretty broad. It includes a student ID. It includes a tribal ID. For some people, in rare circumstances, they can get affidavits from other folks, like perhaps there's a 18-year-old registering to vote for their first time and they don't have an ID document, a parent can do that affidavit that they are this person. Under the new law, the only things that would be allowed would be the Maine driver license, a Maine ID card, a U.S. passport or U.S. passport card, or a U.S. military identification card or Maine National Guard ID card, or U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs ID card. So that's a very narrow list. For students, right now the law is if you're living in Maine, you can vote. And that includes students at the University of Maine, like my niece, but it also includes who grew up and was born in Maine, but it also includes folks that moved to Maine to go to the University of Maine. And so they would have to have a Maine driver license or a U.S. passport in order to vote. So certainly it probably would have a disproportionate impact in reducing potential student voting. And then the other piece is, how is ID proved when you register to vote? You actually have to show that to the registrar. The registrar is the person that's registering you to vote, to their satisfaction. And they can reject that voter registration. If they do, they have to give the voter a hearing or an opportunity for a hearing. But the registrar has to be satisfied that you are who you say you are and that you live in the municipality that you are living in. So you need proof of residency and proof of identity for registration. So some people say, oh, Maine doesn't require ID. Well, no, we require proof of identity at the point of registration, not when you go to vote. And when you go to vote, then you're stating your name and your address. When you make a request, you have to fill out all your information. The clerk is checking that against your voter registration status in the central voter registration system. So they're checking the application for the absentee ballot against the central voter registration system before they ever issue a ballot. And you can track your absentee ballot online, and we publish data. I didn't bring this up. This was happening well before me. We publish the absentee, the list of requests online regularly. So far, there have been over 22,000 Maine citizens requesting absentee ballots. So unfortunately, I was at another event before I came to this event, and I'm about an hour away from my house. So I'm going to need to get on the road soon because I have an extraordinarily early day tomorrow. A friend of mine just loaned me her living room for the night. But I just want to say, I think it's really, if you have questions about the elections, get involved, go volunteer. You can be a poll worker if you're a registered voter anywhere in your county. And it's a great way to see how the system works for yourself. Don't have time to volunteer? Be an observer for an hour or two. You can watch them test the tabulators. It's kind of like watching paint dry, but you can do that. You can watch the absentee ballot processing. You can literally inspect the envelopes. And these days we have big groups of people, Republicans and Democrats, inspecting all the absentee ballots all over the state. You can go on election day and observe for a couple of hours. So it's a very open and transparent process. There are no secrets and back rooms in the administering of the election. And we encourage you to get involved and see how it works for yourself. So thank you very much for coming out on this Zoom call tonight to talk about the more boring vampires and werewolves, but it's really important.
Yeah, like Shenna, I am also about an hour and a half away from home. I've also borrowed a kitchen to do this, and also things are very busy for both of us for our different hobbies, one would say. But it's always a pleasure, really, to talk with people about this. And I would really emphasize what Shenna just said. When we had folks trying to sow a lot of doubt about elections, the National Association of Secretaries of State issued something called the Trusted Information Project, where if you hear something like this that you don't understand or aren't sure if it's true, call your town clerk, call the Secretary of State, call an elections official who's actually doing this work, and they can tell you exactly how their work is being conducted. And like Shenna said, you can see it for yourself. And during the pandemic, especially, we had a lot of people say, how can we help? It's like, go volunteer. And people did, and they're doing it now because they find it to be incredibly gratifying, that they feel like they're contributing something to our democracy by helping people through the process and help them participate in democracy. It's a great thing.
Hey, thank you very much, both of you. It's been a real pleasure listening to you, and I want to thank you for your years of dedication and integrity to the process. That's what makes it work. And we hope the experiment succeeds, right? So, yeah, thank you all for coming, and we'll send you a link to you guys when this is up online if you want to share it with anybody. And yeah, thank your hosts for me as well for making it possible for you to join us. Thanks so much.